Hey guys, Salvador here with Detailers Growth. Today we are back for another highlights podcast series. We still don't know what we're going to call these, but we're going to walk through what we're seeing working well for our clients and sharing that across our entire client base so you can kind of see what's working, what's not working, and take the good, leave out the bad. So today's call, we're going to be talking about what to say on the call with the lead. So, just to give some background on this, why I think structuring the phone call the right way is super important is because nine times out of 10, if a lead comes through from an advertisement, they're not super familiar with your business. So, I think building rapport in the phone call, explaining your process, going into the close, having a good structure for how you go into that phone call can really make your life a lot easier and will hopefully smooth out any kind of peaks and valleys that you have with your closing rates. So, first thing I want to talk about is building rapport. This is probably the most important step in the sales process. And building rapport can look a couple different ways. But I think the main thing that you want to outline here with building rapport is finding out why they're interested in getting their car coded, like what piqued their interest with getting their car coded. And it's going to be one of three reasons. It's either going to be them looking for the protection from oxidation, light scratches, the protection aspect, or it's going to be the shine aspect, more on the paint correction side of things, or the ease of maintenance. Those are the three main overarching bullet points and benefits that we're seeing working across our client base. But once you've identified what's their why, like I'm looking to get this car coated because, I'm older, washing my car just isn't super easy for me. So I want something that'll make it easier. Something like that, you want to be able to identify within the building rapport stage. And I want to start by saying that we'll link the entire sales training that goes really in depth on everything we're talking about. So here we're going to talk about the main bullet points, but at the bottom of this email or somewhere, we will have the video link that goes into a lot more depth. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Radu, and he's going to talk about the next stage after building rapport. So again, once you build rapport and you found out their why, like why they're looking to get their car coded, then you really want to transition to explaining the entire process. Go ahead, Radu.
Yes, so as you said, the first thing is to find out their why. As soon as you find out their why, the most important part of it is then aiming for clarity and simplicity. Once you know exactly, is it the protection side, is it the shine, the ease of maintenance, you can then clearly focus on the main one. And as soon as you have that in mind, the entire call is going to be very easy because people are going to call you for the specific reason. You can then just focus on the most important advantage regarding that aspect. So you can then easily, without using specific technical terms, give them the main point. So I would say the first thing is to aim for clarity and simplicity plus using simple language. As you also know, in case you want to look for a service and you jump on a phone call and someone just starts basically reading this script from Google,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
entire thing, you don't like that. You want the main points. So as long as you're not confusing anyone, that's the first thing. And
100%. Yeah.
after you have these, after you know exactly why, after you clearly explain them, all of those steps, you can also anticipate common questions and concerns. So, in case it's
Yeah.
going to be about the cost or durability or maintenance, if someone is just interested in the ease of maintenance, you can already think, okay, what's that lead going to ask me about the ease of maintenance? And you can start
Yeah.
anticipating those objections, those common questions. Then you can just address all of those proactively without even finishing that maybe 1 minute presentation. They'll already know most of it. And you should get
Yes.
to that point where when you ask them, hey, was everything clear? Most of them should just say, oh, I guess that's it. I don't have any other questions. So
Yes.
as long as we get to that point, I would say that's the most important one. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to double click on that, like when you're explaining the process, like Radu said, you want to keep it simple. You want to use very simple language. One of the best examples would be the decon process. When you say a broad term like a decontamination, the everyday daily driver who's not a car enthusiast might look at that and think to themselves, they have a lot of questions just around what that word means and what that entails because it is a broad term used for a process. Same thing with paint correction. I think the explaining the process is going to be very key to your closing rates because if you explain it the right way, it allows you to build value. It allows you to translate all your expertise and all your knowledge in a very easy to understand way for that lead. So if you could do that efficiently by instead of saying decon, saying something like a clear coat cleanse, instead of saying paint correction, saying polish process, something like that, where you're not using the detailed terms, but you're breaking it down where just by saying that, that person on the other end can clearly understand what exactly you'll be doing to it. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Claudia. Once we have built the rapport, we've identified their why. Why are they looking to get their car coded? Then we can explain the process and really highlight and tailor those benefits to their why. But now I want to talk about the closing, Claudia. When you go from explaining the process to closing, a lot of people think that that is a very hard transition to do, but it's actually a lot more simple. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yes, it's really simple. It's just trying to get to the stage where the client doesn't have any question. But the thing that you want to highlight there is all the benefits and kind of do like a little recap of what you talked about. Like, hey, I'm offering this. Okay, so just to recap, I'm offering this ceramic coating. It lasts this X amount of years. We do this and this and this in the process. How does it look to you? And that's something that is really important to highlight. So, because if you do like a bunch of information, the
Oh, yeah.
client won't be like listening half of the time.
Yeah.
Yes,
And now they're
exactly.
more confused than they were going into the call. You want to
Yeah.
give them that clarity, like Radu mentioned. You don't want to present them this big menu of options. You don't want to overwhelm them with all this technical wording. So that's a
Exactly.
really great point. You want to keep it concise. And before you transition to the close, this is a great way to just double check if everything you just explained makes sense to them. Because if it doesn't and they still have a lot more questions, then you can go back and go more in depth on some of those
Yeah.
points. So that's a really good point of just like, hey, John, does everything we talked about make sense to you? And then depending on what they say, then you go into the closing.
Exactly. And something important about the closing part is try to have a deposit made by the
Yes.
client once you make sure everything's nice, everything's understood, and the client is interested in booking the job with you. That will avoid people ghosting you. So, and that happens. Or even try to push in-person consultations, try to bring the lead into your shop, or you go to the lead and see and talk again about everything, explaining everything, and then booking him, if that makes
Yes,
sense.
yes,
Yeah.
that's a really good point because if you don't collect the deposits, you're going to get no shows, especially if you plan your day around that. Depending on the package, it could be 8 to 12 hours of what you were initially planning for. So now you're booking all your other jobs around that lead, but you
And
didn't collect your
also,
deposits, so there's no commitment. And like Claudia mentioned, if they do have any hesitation around giving you their card information for the deposit, then that's when I would gear the conversation towards seeing the vehicle in person. So, hey, John, instead of collecting deposit, you said everything sounds great, but why don't you see what this looks like in person? Swing by our shop, or better yet, we can come to you if we're mobile and we can show you what we're talking about. We can show you the pay correction process. We can walk you through everything. And this is something that I think could be its own highlights episode. In person consultations, how to do them. One of the biggest benefits of in person consultations is the fact that you have the vehicle there in person, and that person is committed or has more commitment than somebody over the phone to actually getting the job done with you. And one of the other things that we didn't really realize about in person consultations was the social proof that in person consultations can offer. Because I think the biggest thing that we're portraying with in person consultations is that you are a legitimate business. You know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, and it's very clear to them that you know what you're doing. You're an expert. It builds that trust. So that's a great point about closing, Claudia. I'm going to pass the mic over to Alejandra. Let's say you give somebody a quote, but there's a lot of friction there. They're not ready to pull the trigger, they're not ready to commit. Where do you take the conversation from there?
Well, first of all, you have to be flexible and really, really dynamic on your price point because
Yes.
you have to make the person feel like they are buying something more expensive than they are paying. You can add things like after service or I don't know, a window tint that's up on you. And you have to, it doesn't have to be the pricing. You can lower
Right.
your price, yes, but you have to know where your lowest price is and never start by there. You can,
Yes.
you
Yes.
have to always start on the more expensive price and then you can start lowering your price or adding things. It's really useful to add expiration dates, like, hey, we have this price for this month. This is a special promo for these 2 weeks, because the client feels the pressure.
That's a great point. Yes. As far as giving quotes and just setting your pricing in general, like you don't want your main price to be your rock bottom price. Even if you're not advertising, like that's just not how you should structure your pricing. You want to add some wiggle
Yeah.
room for that person who is looking for a discount where you can kind of scratch that itch for them. And like Alejandro mentioned, you want to give an expiration if you're giving them something in return. So, hey, John, I can knock off $100 off your ceramic coating package if you can schedule within the next week. Great
Yeah.
point. And Anthony, I'm going to pass the mic over to you. You might have heard this from clients where leads are giving certain objections, but it doesn't seem like they're real. Can you kind of expand on objections?
Yeah, so after hearing all these steps in the process, as a lead, you want to think about it like this. If you were clear, if you were dynamic with the lead, and if you were paying attention to what they were telling you their needs were, then you're in great shape to close. But even if you follow all these steps, the lead will always have price in mind. And it's
Yes.
9 out of 10 times that's what it is. They're price shopping. And objections like, let me talk to my wife, let me think about it, the price is too high, are things that sometimes are statements based off of things that you might not have explained well.
Yeah.
So if you weren't able to identify any of their initial needs, like the why am I getting my car ceramic coated, then that's something that they're still thinking about, and that's why they're hesitant to book. And so these are just things that we need to think about, because 9 out of 10 times you can do everything well. Like I said, be dynamic, think about why they want to ceramic coat the cart, like all those steps in the process you did well. But price is ultimately the main and the large concern for leads. So
Yes. Yeah. And pricing can seem way out of their reach if they don't understand what they're buying. So if they
Yep.
think they're getting a wax or a sealant, and that's kind of how you've explained it to them, and you haven't explain the difference with how a ceramic coating is so much better than your traditional wax or sealant, then they're basing their pricing or the quote that you give them as if it were a wax. So there's a big discrepancy there, which is why they don't see the value in what you're selling them in the ceramic coating. So I say that because if you get those kind of objections, those smoking mirror kind of objections of like, let me think about it, let me talk to the wife, 9 times out of the 10, something wasn't explained correctly in the sales process. And if it was, now you're kind of closer to actually getting them to commit or coming in person. But I just want to say that if somebody isn't 100% on board with pricing, it's not always that your pricing is way out of reach or way out of bounds. They're just comparing it to something that is traditionally a lot less expensive. So you
Yep.
want to start there. And another thing that I want to mention here to kind of wrap up is when you give pricing, and you explain the value, you build up the report, you've done everything right. Another thing that we talked about in our most recent coaching call is that you want to slow them down because in their minds, the only thing they're thinking about is price, price, price. They just want a number. They're quote shopping. But if you can slow them down to see the value, you're explaining your process, you're sending over some videos, you're doing everything right, that could also be a good indicator for getting them to kind of make the right decision, kind of getting them over the fence. Is you want to be
Yep.
able to break everything down easy. You want to slow them down because if they're in the shopping mood, they saw an ad, they just want a number. But if they don't have the context around that number,
the value.
yeah, it's not going to be there for them. They're going to say no, no matter what the price is. It could be $100, it could be $200, but they don't know what they're buying. So I think this is why it's super important to reiterate and slow them down. So, with that being said, we've kind of gone through how you should structure the phone call, but this is just a quick 20-minute overview. If you want to see the tacticals, the what to say, the more in depth explanations, below we're going to have our training module that goes really in depth on this. Aaron did a really good job of breaking that down and kind of explaining everything from start to finish, how to say it, tonality, everything that you need to really educate somebody and hopefully increase your closing rates. So, without further ado, I'm Salvador here sitting down with the Detailers Growth team. And I want to thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.